Hi everybody, this is Laura. Thank you so much for joining me on my channel. Today I have a layout that I made using the January My Creative Scrapbook Limited Edition kit. I started this layout off the way I start off a lot of my layouts, which is by inking some strips of pattern paper. All of these strips of paper are 1/2 inch in width, and I'm using Victorian Velvet Distress Oxide to ink all of the edges. I'm going to be layering these strips on this square, which I accidentally cut into 2 triangles, so I'm using a piece of cardstock to hold them together. I put some ATG adhesive on the background. You could see that I drew a line to help me make sure that I have all of the strips going straight up and down. And then I started to arrange the strips of paper. I add a little bit more adhesive, and then I add another strip of paper. I try to vary the pattern and the color of the strips so that the pattern papers will look nicely distributed across the piece of paper that I'm covering. I continue to add the strips of paper until the whole right-hand side of this square was covered, and then I use my scissors and I cut along the edge. I use my paper trimmer to cut along the second edge, and now I'll use those pieces that I cut off on the other side of this square. I'm going to repeat this process one more time on another square, and then I'm going to cut all of the pieces in half, and then I'll have 4 triangles. I finished covering this first square. I'm removing that piece of paper that was holding the 2 triangles together. Then I use my paper trimmer to cut along that center diagonal line. And here are my first 2 triangles. I'm using some of the Victorian Velvet Distress Oxide to ink along the outer edges of the triangles. One of the smaller pieces fell off of the triangle. That happens sometimes because there's not enough adhesive, so I just added a little bit more. And then I went on to create the second 2 triangles. Now I'm going to start working on my background. There are a lot of layers to the background, so I pre-cut them off camera just because it took a while for me to figure out how all of this was going to fit together, but I'll give you all of the measurements. I use a piece of 12 by 12 inch kind of peach cardstock, and then I mounted a piece of white cardstock on top of it. The white cardstock measures 11.5 inches. I attached the 4 corners that I made down to a piece of white cardstock that measures 11 1/8 inches. I put the triangles that I made at the same time across from each other on this square. I didn't know if it would be noticeable at the end, and I'm not sure that it is, but I just thought that it would look best to have them in opposite corners since the strips of paper match up. I could have just attached the triangles down to the other white piece of paper that's already attached to the piece of cardstock, but my thought was that there was more of a likelihood of everything being straight and lining up if I had it on its own piece of paper. I know some of you might be cringing at how many pieces of paper that I'm using, but this is just my way of making sure that everything is straight. Now I'm adding yet more paper to the layout. I use a piece of white cardstock that measures 8 5/8 inches, and then the blue square measures 8 3/8 inches. I adhere the blue paper down to the white paper, but I didn't attach the white paper down yet because I wanted to use those punched out border strips that are to the left of my mat to go along the edge of the white paper. I know that the corners are going to go right up to the edge and you won't see where the 2 strips of paper meet, so that's a relief because sometimes that could be tricky to figure out how to get those corners to match up. I just had to make sure that I had all of those strips of paper straight and that they were all the same distance from the edge of the white paper. The punch that I use is a Fiskars border punch. You can see it kind of to the right of my mat. I've had that punch in my stash for quite a while. It's just a good classic pattern. And I also thought that it went well with the cut file that I'm going to use. You could see that to the left of my mat. Along the edge, there is a scallop, and I thought that this was pretty close. The cut file is called Leafy Mandala, and that cut file, along with many others, is available to my Creative Scrapbook subscribers. Now that all of the border strips are attached to the white square, I'm using my scissors to trim them down, and the square is finally complete, and I'm going to attach it down to the layout. When I planned how large each of the elements on the layout was going to be, how large to make all of these different squares. I started from the center. I used my mandala. I put it on the piece of blue cardstock, and then I went out from there just to make sure that the mandala would have a nice border of blue all around it to kind of help it stand out. I backed the mandala with some of the pattern papers from this month's kit. In our January kit, we received a gorgeous Prima collection called French Blue. When I backed the cut file with these pattern papers, I tried to make the patterns as symmetrical as I possibly could. Using this beautiful gray paper from the kit, I used another Fiskars sponge and I punched out 4 strips of paper. Then I inked the edges using Distress Oxide in Hickory Smoke. Then I tucked them underneath the white scalloped border. I forgot to mention that when I backed the mandala, I also did some stitching on it. I used some white embroidery thread and I stitched all along the inside of all those layers of the mandala. I also put an enamel dot in the center. I had a white enamel dot that was kind of hanging around my scrapbooking table, and I thought it would look nice in the center, so I decided to attach that down at an earlier time. I just felt that it needed something in the center, and since I had that white dot handy, I figured I might as well get it attached before I lose it. And then once I had those 4 strips of gray paper attached down, I trimmed along the edges. Now I finally have that background complete and I can move on to my photo. This is a picture of both of my daughters. We were in a museum in New York City. It's called the Museum of the City of New York, and we really enjoyed that museum. Sometimes I think my kids must be rolling their eyes when I tell them we're going to a museum, although they don't say anything to me. But when we got there, my younger daughter, who's usually not a super big fan of museums, was really into a lot of the exhibits. There's a beautiful staircase. There are lights hanging from the ceiling. So we took pictures at the bottom of the staircase and then again at the top of the staircase. We're actually standing right outside the area where you can get a bite to eat. And it was just a really nice day. And I also picked this photo because I thought it went really well with the pattern papers. A lot of the background has some of the same tones that are in this collection. I wanted to have some distress layers around the photo, so I used some of the pattern papers, I used some of the ephemera pieces, and I distressed the edges with my scissors, and then I inked the edges once again with the hickory smoke, and I pieced all of these items together behind the photo to create a mat for it. And then I used my fingers and I further distressed all of the papers by bending up the edges. I already had the photo mounted on some white cardstock and then again on some blue cardstock before I added those layers. I had this gold title Awesome in my stash. I thought that it was perfect for this layout. This isn't a scrapbooking item. This is one of those plastic pieces that you could use on one of those felt message or letter boards for your home. I believe I had to cut off some pegs from the back, but I thought that it was just the right size and the right color for this layout. I wanted to add some embellishments to the corners. At first, I was just going to make it very simple, but then of course I got a little carried away. I took some fussy cut flowers, I mounted them on some white paper, and then I fussy cut all around to create a white border. Sometimes I'm cutting the border off, sometimes I'm adding a white border, but I didn't think that the flowers would be very visible without that border, so I created one for each of those 3 corners, and then in the 4th corner I have a die cut that had a white border on it. I tucked a black and white butterfly underneath the title, and then as if this wasn't busy enough, I added some of the dimensional flowers. I have them in the upper right-hand corner of the photo, and I also include one right next to the butterfly by the title. I used some gel glue to attach those down. I moved the butterfly to the left of the title, and now I'm going to add some gold pearls to the layout. These pearls are made by Pinkfresh Studio. They're called Metallic Pearls in matte gold. I layered one on top of that white enamel dot that I already had in the center. I used my tweezers to help me place the pearls. I think there are 4 different sizes in this one pack of pearls, which I really like because I think that adding the different sizes makes the mandala and the pearls look a little bit more interesting. I'm using some glossy accents to attach those pearls down. That's my favorite adhesive for embellishments like this. Then I continued using my tweezers and the glossy accents, and I placed these gold pearls on all of the points of the mandala going all the way to the edge. Then I also added a pearl on all 4 corners of the blue square. Then I went back to the center of the mandala and I added some more of the tiniest pearls to that area. Next, I wanted to add one of my favorite embellishments, which is photo corners. So I used my EK Success Photo Corner Punch, and I punched some pink photo corners out of one of the pieces of ephemera. I used the Victorian Velvet Distress Oxide. I inked the edges, and then I used some ATG adhesive to attach those corners down to my photo. And right now, I just have 2 photo corners on my page. I want to add some butterflies to those corner. Right now they're not clusters, but they will be in a little while. I put some foam on the back of their wings just to give them a little bit of dimension. I'm going to have butterflies in all 4 corners. I'm going to have 2 blue butterflies and 2 pink butterflies, and the matching colors are going to be in opposite corners. I have a small blue butterfly in the upper right-hand corner, and then I'm going to have a larger one in the lower left-hand corner. There was a little bit of a measuring tape that I really liked, so I tucked that in with the photo cluster. And then I added that last blue butterfly to the lower left-hand corner. Of course, I'm popping up that butterfly on some foam as well. And I also tucked a little ephemera piece, it's a flower, to the right-hand side of the typewriter. I had cut out and embossed a whole bunch of these die-cut branches for another layout that I made using the limited edition kit this month. So I had quite a stack of them left over, and I thought that they would be perfect for this layout. I thought that they went really well with the title and also the gold pearls. In my stash of die cuts that I created for other layouts but had extras of, I found these leaves that I thought were just perfect for this layout. I thought that the layout needed a little bit of green, and so when I found these, I was thinking they would go really, really well with this layout. I tucked some of the larger ones in with the dimensional flower clusters, and then I had some smaller leaves that I tucked into the corner clusters. Those corner clusters are getting a lot larger than I had expected they were going to, but I really liked the green all around the layout. I thought that it broke up some of the softer colors that were on the layout, and I just really liked them, so I decided I was going to go with some larger corner clusters. I also added a pearl to each of the corners. I just felt like it was a little unbalanced without pearls in those spots. And then I added some strips of pearls to the centers of the butterflies. These are self-adhesive strips of pearls. I think they add a little bit of a finishing touch to the butterflies. I didn't want to use more gold pearls. I thought there was enough gold on the layout now, so I decided to go with these regular colored pearls. And they are self-adhesive, but I decided to use some glossy accents because I didn't think that the particular strip I was working with had a lot of adhesive on it. So now I've decided that I wanted to add a photo corner in all 4 corners of the photo. So I punched out some more photo corners. Once again, I inked the edges and attached them down with some adhesive. And then I added some pearls to all 4 corners. These pearls are a little bit larger than the ones on the butterflies. And as I said before, I like to add embellishments of different sizes. I just think that it makes the layout look a little bit more interesting. Until now, I only had those gold embossed branches on the larger flower clusters. But then I decided that since I had all of the other elements on the corner clusters, I might as well just add a couple of them to each of those clusters. So once again, those corner clusters continue to have more embellishments added to them. Now I'm using some Finnabair heavy white gesso, and I'm using an old bristle brush, and I'm dabbing a little bit of the gesso on the edges of the petals of all of those 4-dimensional flowers that I have on the layout. This just adds a little bit of a highlight to the flowers, and I think that just adds another layer of interest. I've had that container of gesso for as long as I can remember. I only use the heavy gesso every now and then. And every time I open it up, I spray a little bit of water in there because I could tell that it's starting to get a little bit dried out. But I have to say that I have been able to use it for a very, very long time. Once the gesso was dry, which doesn't take long at all, I added a little bit of Opal Glitter Medium to those 4 flowers. This is a clear medium. It has some glitter and sparkle to it. Once again, I'm using this really old bristle brush. You could see that most of the paint has worn off the handle. And looking at this brush now, it really looks like a mess. But one thing I have to say for these older brushes is that the bristles don't come off. And that's really important with the glitter medium, because if the bristles come off, they'll get stuck onto the flowers, and that's not a good look. So even though they're not pretty, I'm happy to use these brushes. Up to this point, all of the branches have been placed on the layout, but they haven't been attached down. Now that I'm happy with the placement, I'm going back with some gel glue and I'm gluing them all down. I try to just put a little bit of glue at the base to hold things like branches to the layout. I tuck one last gold branch in by the title, and this layout is complete, and here are some close-ups. Thank you so much for watching this video. I want to thank you for your views and your likes, and I especially want to say thank you for all of those kind comments. I don't take those comments lightly. They really brighten up my day, and they really mean a lot to me. Thank you so much. The link to the My Creative Scrapbook website is always in the description box of my Creative Scrapbook videos. They have beautiful new kits every month. I really encourage you to check them out. I'm sure you'll find one that you love. I hope that you have a fantastic day, and I hope to see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.